Good day, comrades and friends. This is Dr. Gabe Roberts, the quantum chiropractor, the subconscious healer, new thought minister, and your expert in energy medicine. Lately, I've discussed the subconscious mind or the unconscious mind. I kind of use them interchangeable in many different posts, videos, and blogs. So today, I want to dive in a little deeper and look at some astonishing abilities that it has to do with things that are far beyond what we've been led to believe. In fact, the US government has been heavily invested into looking into paranormal phenomena in regards to our capabilities within the human mind. Within these programs associated with the DoD, intelligence gathering and communications, these all seem to lead back to one origin: the Nazis. Although this is somewhat a sinister way to begin looking into this field, military intelligence was able to compensate a trove of documentations and findings in the works known as Das on Inner Bay, which were formed by one of the most powerful men in the Nazi orchestrates and architects, Heinrich Himmler. The U.S. forces looked into his science organizations with interest into things which involved extrasensory, extrasensory perception, knowing things and sensing things beyond the tangible matter, ESP, psychokinesis, and the idea that you could actually influence matter with your mind. Matt dowsing and dowsing, and particularly the U.S. government showed an interest in this because they were interested in anything the Nazis might have discovered for, of course, for technical and intelligence purposes. And due to the fact that the Soviet Union got the other half of these documents, it actually led to a psychic arms race. And as I mentioned in previous videos about remote viewing and being unclassified from the CIA recently, remote viewing is just a fancy term for ESP, or clairvoyance, which I will define momentarily. This term was coined in the 1970s, and the program was undergoing investigation at the Stanford Research Institute. Within these now declassified documents, they actually contained extraordinary high success rates achieved with remote viewing, where the CIA chronicles actually placed psychics in these laboratories in Faraday cages, which are electronically shielded rooms. And they would begin with very simple tasks, such as what's in the box tests. They would literally put a box in front of psychics, and the box was closed, the lid, they could not see the contents of it. And they would have these psychics begin to mentally probe for the contents within the box. In a very short time, after people began to pass these tests repeatedly, they would move on to larger and more tactical uses, such as looking into classified facilities, being able to see into buildings and areas that were highly forbidden and sometimes 3,000 miles away. These psychics knew things that there was no rational explanation for knowing, how they could have found out. In such one case, there was a secret NSA building deep underground, and there was no way that these people had access to them. This even raised alarms within the DoD as they began to come in and investigate the CIA, looking for signs of espionage because the psychics were that accurate. They were convinced that there was a mole in the CIA from this. Again, it's all from the unclassified documents available to anyone now. Now, this goes a little deeper than I explore personally, but with my own works, what drives me is to push the boundaries of what we can accomplish in terms of health achievements and healings by unlocking the potential within our own mind. So what exactly is ESP? Is there a sixth sense? To answer this, let's take a brief look at how we are constantly exposed to a bombardment of information, and it comes into us through our 5 sensory factors. As this data comes in, as Csikszentmihalyi, who pointed this out, There's 2.3 million bits of information per second coming into contact with our neurology constantly. And that's a conservative number at best. There's now studies that indicate it may be as high as 90 million bits per second. Depending on the scientist who's actually measuring this data, a bit can actually mean different units of information. Now, for this, let's focus on the proportion of information between the conscious and the subconscious mind. This flood of information comes to our five sensory factors, what we can see, smell, taste, touch, and feel. And these are the only channels that our neurology is influenced by, which allows us to interpret this enormous amount of data. Now, I was just asked about this by a patient yesterday, and I told them that I would address this in the video. So there's actually no such thing as a sixth sense. That's a misnomer. There are only these five. However, what we need to understand is that there's two categories of how our senses work. We have tangible senses and we have our intangible senses. So we have heard of people who use intangible senses, and we just learned how the government has and still does today a massive interest in this. As the quantum chiropractor, I certainly have these abilities. My wife has them, and at least two of my children have them, my son Jude and my daughter Aria. As people who are sensitive to energy have them as well. We've heard of clairvoyance, right? That simply means receiving visual images or information from somewhere that's impalpable or non-tangible. A clairvoyant is a person who sees things that are non-material, as is in the case with remote viewing. A clairaudient person is someone who hears things, perhaps voices or noises, which are again intangible. Now, I'm a scientist first, and I don't know where that intangible source is from. Perhaps Akashic records, perhaps higher consciousness. I don't know. But there's plenty of evidence for this, and it is 100% validated in documented records. In the peer-reviewed published Journal of Neuroscience, there's a study involving a patient who has a full cortical blindness and yet could still react to another person's gaze. In an MRI, the patient was exposed to gazes directed at him and gazes directed away from him. Now, to most people, this kind of thing wouldn't make a difference. However, the brain scans demonstrated otherwise by showing the brain actually lit up in the areas when the patient was gazed at. So this person's brain could detect when someone gazed at them and they're fully blind. Again, this falls into clairkinesthetic, as they could actually feel it. Clairkinesthetics are people who receive feelings from an intangible source, as many as my patients are. Some are very sensitive. And I think that we all have this to a degree, just how in tune we are with ourselves, how healthy we are, and a combination of other things. Clairolfactory are people who can actually smell intangible things from sources, again, that are non-material. This is a little bit more rare. I only know two of these people with this ability. One is my neighbor who lives next to me, and the other is a patient I worked with yesterday. So I think these are a little less common. And the sixth sense is actually just a sensation through one of these five, but it's from a non-tangible source. Perhaps someone listening to this has this ability and knows exactly what I'm talking about. Chances are you know someone who senses these things and you didn't even know that. A neighbor or a friend perhaps, or maybe even somebody you walk by at a gas station. It may surprise you the amount of prominent scientists who are deeply involved in this field of ESP. Dr. Joseph Rhine of Duke University, known all over the world, founded the peer-reviewed Journal of Parapsychology. And this covers telepathic abilities, clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis, as well as human consciousness. The Psychical Research Society of Great Britain and America are known and established for nearly 140 years. They're some of the most distinguished scientists in the world in the psychic field, including men who were knighted, such as Sir Oliver Lodge, Sir William Crookes, William James in America, the father of the psychology, and several others who were knighted and honored for their work. When the Mathematical Society of America, which included some of the most prominent and respected groups of scientists in the world, looked into some of Dr. Rhine's experiments and his research, they found they were completely validated. No fraud, no hoaxes, no scams. Another fascinating topic that I tend to gravitate towards is just how much information is actually picked up by our neurology. 2.3 million bits per second. And our subconscious mind actually can handle this and file it and organizes it with ease. Now, this is equivalent to having 5 cameras or sensors on us and inside our bodies running at all times and recording every little detail that's ever happened to you in your life, even in the womb. And it has multiple files for storage to accommodate all of this data. There are many published studies in very prestigious journals on focus and looking at what the mind actually can pick up. In one of these studies, they took 2 people and sat them at a table in a very busy restaurant surrounded by other tables with people. So each table has people who are conversing with one another. So it's a very busy place. And we've all experienced that when you go into a busy restaurant or a busy store and you hear that background noise, the buzz of people talking. Then, after 30 minutes of having a meal and a conversation, the scientists asked the people in the study, how much of the conversation could you say you remember? Please give us the details. And they found the people in the middle of the table could remember what we typically would can be considered normal, around 60 to 70% of the details. The rest of it was kind of fuzzy. They couldn't recall everything. Now, here's where it gets more interesting. They took this person and under hypnotic influence, they found that they could not only recall every word that was said in their conversation at their table, but they could also specifically identify details that were discussed from other tables around them with 100% accuracy, word for word. If you are receiving it, your subconscious mind is recording it. And this is not an isolated event. Dave Ellman had cases in the 1960s where he was able to put people who had previous surgeries and under hypnotic influence, they could actually remember exactly word for word what the surgeon had said when these people were out cold under anesthesia. So there are cases of people who have had severe injuries, were unconscious, bleeding profusely, and even had a few suggestions to the subconscious mind, and that actually caused the bleeding to stop. So everything you've ever tasted, everything you've ever felt, touched, or smelled, or seen has been recorded in your subconscious mind. But your conscious mind, like a submarine in the bottom of the ocean, trying to navigate with a pen light, is not capable of being aware of more than 126 bits per second. And that is why when people come to me, I have patients come to me all the time and they say, I have this problem and it's this. Here's my problem. Here's my problem. And that is actually never the problem. I had a man who sought me out with recurring chest pain and tightness the other day. He tried everything, all kinds of doctors, supplements. He was actually eating paleo, exercising regularly. He was very fit. When he sat in front of me on the screen digitally and we regressed him back, next thing you know, he's 6 years old and what's coming out of his mouth, the stepdad he had hitting him at that time, had nothing to do with heart attacks or clogged arteries or anything else. It was a memory he had in his body. It was a memory that his heart neurology wasn't aware was over yet. If this fascinates you, go to my page, Dr. Gabe Roberts, and like it or tag a friend as I continue to go in depth on the mind, how it works, and show you the greatest part of you is something you'll never see.